Here's some breaking news. Hunter Biden may no longer practice law in Washington, D.C. The D.C. Court of Appeals suspended his license on Tuesday. This development stems from his conviction on 3 felony counts relating to the purchase of a gun while suffering from addiction. Now, the D.C. Bar's Board on Professional Responsibility will hold a hearing to determine whether Hunter Biden's law license should be permanently revoked. That will depend upon whether he is found to have committed moral turpitude. Hunter Biden is facing up to 25 years in prison on the gun charges, though as a first-time offender, he's unlikely to get anywhere near that. His legal team is vigorously fighting the conviction. Earlier this week, they asked for an entirely new trial, arguing that the Delaware proceeding did not have proper jurisdiction. So, not an unexpected development here. Law license suspended. That's something that happens if you're a lawyer and you're charged and then convicted with crimes. It doesn't mean he's permanently disbarred yet. He has to, go through this proceeding with the Bar Association, and then he could actually lose the law license permanently.
Right, so a panel in D.C. there decided to review this guilty verdict for Hunter Biden. They constituted it is a serious crime, and now they have to consider whether or not it's morally serious enough to cost him his license to practice. I don't know that his practice has been booming lately. We know that, I think it was a year ago, that he was in court with the mother of his child around child support payments, saying that he couldn't afford it. There needed to be a renegotiation there. So I don't know how much this will really affect him financially if he really was practicing a lot at this point in time.
Well, luckily you don't need a license. There's no license they can take away to produce art. So that business model is still quite in place for him.
I would be living for Hunter Biden, living in the basement of the White House, just focusing on his art, just moving back in with his parents. I think Joe would welcome him.
I think so, very much, potentially to the campaign's detriment. Speaking of which, in other Hunter Biden news, the laptop story again being discussed on social media in connection with this upcoming presidential debate between Biden and Trump. Now, CNN moderator Dana Bash is going to moderate the upcoming debate. She's married to Jeremy Bash, who's a former intelligence official, who's one of the 50 people who signed that infamous letter that said that Hunter's laptop resembled Russian disinformation. Here was Jeremy Bash making that case on MSNBC.
This looks like Russian intelligence. This walks like Russian intelligence. This talks like Russian intelligence. This effort by Rudy Giuliani and the New York Post and Steve Bannon to cook up supposed dirt on Joe Biden looks like a classic Russian playbook disinformation campaign. And let's recount exactly what happened. In July of 2019, when President Trump talked to Zelensky, he said, talk to Rudy Giuliani. He's my guy on trying to dig up false dirt on Joe Biden. Then Giuliani goes to Kiev in December of 2019 and meets with Andrei Derkach, who is the Ukrainian lawmaker with known ties to Russian intelligence. That assessment, by the way, is not my assessment. That's the assessment of the Trump intelligence community leadership, who in August of this year put out a statement saying that Andrei Derkach and Russian intelligence were trying to denigrate Joe Biden. And then the next month in September, Steve Mnuchin at the Treasury Department put out a statement saying that Derkach is a known Russian intelligence operative and has been for the last decade. So when the intelligence community goes in and warns Donald Trump that Rudy Giuliani is being worked over by Russian intelligence, and then Rudy Giuliani suddenly comes forward with these mysteriously created emails, probably hacked through a Russian intelligence operation, we have to acknowledge the fact that the President of the United States is supporting, is condoning, is welcoming a Russian intelligence operation.
So in that interview, he gives the establishment intelligence official position that this has Russian involvement clearly, that it was hacked, that it might have been manipulated, that he blames Trump and people in Trump's orbit for falling for this, and then he was one of the people who signed that letter. So he's going pretty far there in his comments. Then Politico and other people in the media claim that that letter demonstrates that it's Russian misinformation. We now know years later that the laptop was left at a repair store and turned over to the FBI, and it made its way into Rudy Giuliani's hands, and is the content on it is legitimate emails, information about Hunter Biden. It was used in this trial to help convict him of the gun-related crimes, to help establish that he was purchasing drugs and his whereabouts and those kinds of things. So some people, some conservatives on social media are saying, in their quest to portray Jake Tapper and Dana Bash as unfair, as hostile to Trump, are pointing out that she's married to someone who got this, who didn't fly the appeal to heaven flag, but was involved in a very important political question, and it ended up being wrong.
Would it matter to you if they weren't married during the time of this happening? I mean, if Samuel Alito is not responsible for his wife's political opinions, is he responsible for his ex-wives? They got divorced in 2007.
Well, I'm just calling to attention something that the conservatives are saying is unfair, especially with the guilt by association in terms of wives and husbands and all of that kind of stuff.
Right. I think, Dana Bash maybe was married to this person because they have similar political views and they find common ground on that. She, of course, is not responsible for all of her husband's political views and vice versa. But I think in this case, Jeremy Bash, during the time they were married, very interesting inside baseball, was working at a law firm that was counsel to the U.S. Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence at the time they were reviewing the debacle around uranium being sold to Iraq. Of course, Valerie Plame recommended her husband, Joseph Wilson, to go on a mission to potentially try and purchase uranium and facilitate this via the CIA. She was outed by Novak, the journalist, as being a CIA operative during all of this. But really, it was about Bush making inflammatory statements about how likely it was that Iraq had access to weapons of mass destruction. And interesting that Bash was on the council then at the time he was married to Dana. So what is her, I don't know, that's kind of a good outcome in terms of national security.
How incestuous the whole national security establishment and the media are. There's so much spillover. There's so much, not just marriages, famous people's, journalists, their parents they got their role because their parents were involved in politics or in national security specifically. Obviously, the talking heads on mainstream cable news, so many of them come from national security. So many of them are making, confident assertions, including lying to the American people, as James Clapper once did, about the extent of surveillance on the American people, all that kind of thing. We get our news from former career civil servant type people who are committed to a certain ideology that is, I would argue, shielded from sufficient democratic measures of accountability and control, because in many cases these aren't even political people. These are people who are installed in positions and make policy that a lot of Americans don't agree with, and then they go on to CNN and MSNBC and other places to propagate those views. So I think it's something worth calling attention to. Obviously, she's not still married to him, and even if they were married, they might have totally different views on the subject. I'm not myself making a necessarily big deal about it, but it is something being talked about by conservatives today.
It is interesting that conservatives are making a point to talk about it, though, isn't it, Robbie? Because she's not a Supreme Court judge. Yeah. Why is it that they're
flag thing again, huh?
Why are so many conservatives outraged that Dana Bash's husband, who was her ex-husband of over 7 years at the point of the Hunter laptop story, why is she responsible for his views and positions during that time when they weren't even married?
Yeah.
And she is a reporter, a commentator, a host, not a Supreme Court judge, but she owns her ex-husband's views, but Samuel Alito doesn't own his wives. Is it a gender thing, or is it like this is how it fits my narrative of the political power structure at this time?
I don't care in either case. I think the Supreme Court case is more compelling on the Clarence Thomas side. Ginny Thomas is a very politically active person and was, in fact, involved or having discussions with people doing the Stop the Steal stuff, I think the scrutiny there is perfectly valid.
I think you're more fair
than
than
the Alito one, just because I don't think what she did is important.
As long as the application of your moral position on this is consistent, which yours is, but
Right.
we
Also,
can't
I'm not-
say
I'm not-
that for everyone on Twitter right now.
Well, also, I think it's fair to criticize them both. I was just
Yeah.
not calling on Alito or Thomas to lose their positions of the Supreme Court or recuse themselves, nor am I calling for Dana Bash to not be involved in the debate or be punished or in any way. I'm just calling attention to something the conservatives found interesting.
I do think it's
Make of that what you
interesting
will.
because of what you said. How it exposes how intertwined the media is, political candidates are, and the national security state.
Everybody in media is some famous person's scion or cousin or niece or nephew. Present company excluded.
Right.
We're
Everyone
no one.
except for us, you guys.
We're just the little people. Stay with us. More Rising right after this.